Hello and welcome to Elvenhome, and to this edition, which is really something of shreds and patches. I've been doing quite a few things this week to complete, and I mean complete, the build of the engine shed and to start looking at installing it and what will go in and around the shed once it gets on the layout. And also an update on where I am in lighting the market stalls after all the helpful responses I had to the last video. So let's move on to one of the jobs that I had to do to complete the engine shed was to build the cage ladder, a kit that I've shown you before because I've used it elsewhere that I get from PD Models. So let me take you back to an evening last week when I decided to tackle building the cage ladder. Here you can see that the cage and the ladder come in a brass etch. I'd already marked the point on the ladder that was necessary for the length of the wall, and it's just a case of taking these out. I was going to use the snips that you see there, but I just couldn't get the snips in, and I thought it'd be more likely to deform the brass. So I sacrificed a blade and gently cut out all the pieces, keeping away from the edges and then trimming up later if I needed to do that. So the first thing to do is to release the ladder, which took a little while to do. Before moving on to releasing the cage. Once those were released, I cleaned up the edges to the extent that they were necessary. And here you can see a close-up of the ladder entirely flat. And the next thing that needs to be done is to bend the feet of the ladder that go against the wall, and obviously the two handrails at the top need to be taken through 90 degrees. It's a two-stage process, which I couldn't keep it in focus. I think you see it enough. You first of all bend those little side feet right the way down through 90 degrees, and then halfway along there's another mark where you bend it back through 90 degrees. And what that gives you, and you can see me here working away through the other feet slowly, what that gives you then is a set of feet all the way down that allow the ladder to stand proud of the wall, and for the handrails at the top to hook over the top of the wall. Once that's all complete, you will have your ladder with all the little feet neatly bent. This is something you need the headset for because it's quite close work. And here you can see the ladder with all the feet now bent 90 degrees down and then halfway back 90 degrees the other way, and the two handrails now bent into position. And that's all you have to do in terms of forming up the ladder side of things. The next thing that's got to be done is to cut the cage the right length for the ladder. I don't have the cage completely surrounding the ladder because you do need to get underneath the cage to be able to get on the ladder itself. So the cage starts a little way up from the bottom. And all I'm doing here is cutting it to size and then forming it over. The recommendation is a 5mm dowel. I didn't have one. This is 6.3mm, but it's good enough, and it helps you bend and form the cage into the well, it's not entirely a semicircle because of course it needs to be big enough for a person to go up the middle. And then you can reform it and shape it once you get it onto the ladder. And here you can see I've completed it to a certain point. The thing to do now is to attach it to the ladder, and the best and easiest way is using solder. So I cleaned the tip of the soldering iron first to make sure it was completely clean, and what I'm doing now is tinning my first point, and then you'll see that I'll do another two to give me a little bit of solder sitting on the ladder that I can melt to help grab the cage when I offer the cage up to the ladder. And then once I was happy that that was working, I put two other points. And the way you put this together is that you solder one side on 3 points, and once those are in place, you can then bend the ladder over into shape and place and solder along the other side. And here you see me tinning the solder in place on the other parts of the ladder. I actually put some flux along the whole of this, partly because I couldn't be sure the precise points at which the solder would go. But it also just helps the solder run once you put it in contact. And you don't really need to keep it in contact very long. The solder melts quite quickly. Now this is here you see an act of stupidity. I am trying to work behind the item in the dark, and at some point shortly inspiration will strike me and you will see me turn the ladder around. Which meant, one, I could see, and two, the light was shining where I wanted to put the solder, and lo and behold, it became a much easier process than to start work on putting the first piece in, and you'll see that's caught straight away. It's then a case of going through and completing the solder. Now you're seeing me work on the other side, and you'll see me also starting to form the shape of the cage as I'm putting the bits of solder on. And as I said, you're not putting the heat there very long, so you don't burn your fingers doing this. There's not much heat transfer along the brass. And again here I'm just forming the cage to give it a better shape, because the 6.3 is a little bit too big. And I think I'm pretty much finished now. This was the last piece, which gave me the completed ladder. One big blob of solder which had to be filed down a bit. But otherwise, that's how you create the cage, and there's 2 of those in the packet. Well, now you can see this is the finished engine shed. There's no more work to be done on the engine shed. It's all the various bits that I said needed completing have been done. You can see on the right hand side the cage ladder has been painted black and fitted. I've fitted the walkway. This is a simple brass etch kit which you just fold up the 2 barriers either side to create the walkway. It's actually 2 whole kits and a little bit of one. You can probably see here if I hold it up a bit. I put 3 pieces of plasticard across to lift the walkway up so it wasn't sitting on the roof itself, which also helped make sure I was keeping it level. I had a little pair, there's some steps there, they're all painted black, which makes it quite difficult to see if I bring it into the focus. There we go. That is white metal, and I can't remember which kit gave me those stairs, but I didn't use them. I used something else. And they've been sitting there waiting, and I cut the length off that I needed, and they've just the right angle. It was really rather good. The gutters and downpipe has gone on. If I bring you this from this side, you can see the gutters and the downpipe has gone on. As ever, the gutter is just half round plasticard painted black. The brackets, I was struggling for something to use to make the brackets, and I eventually settled upon using some I-beam. I had, if I bring this in, a piece of I-beam that was already painted black rather handily, just a bit of I-beam. And so what I've done is cut off 1.5mm widths of the I-beam. And the beauty of that is that the half round sits nicely up against the edge. So that provides a good basis for it to stick onto the I-beam. And the I-beam was just the right width to position the gutter so that it poked out from the edge of the roof. So the gutters have been put on both sides. And then once I'd finished and was standing back to enjoy this piece of work, the lights stopped working. And the black wire that was coming out of that was powering the lights on the left-hand side, the joint that you may recall I had problems with before, had obviously decided to start playing me up again. So some emergency repairs, in fact, have only just been finished. And a yellow wire was fed up and soldered in the place, and that's working fine now, thank goodness. So the next thing for the shed is for it to be installed on the layout. Now, what I'm going to do is take you through how I intend to lay out the inside of the shed a bit later in this video. But what I'm pleased to say is that this is now the completed depot. And so I'm no longer actively scratch building something. That's always dangerous, of course, because then I start doodling, but I really would like to do something other than scratch building for the next few months. So let's go on to the next part of the video, and we'll come back and have a look at where the engine shed is going to be sited and what's going to be inside it in just a moment. Time for an update on the project to put lights onto the market stall. And first of all, can I just say thank you to all the people that replied to my cri de coeur in the last video. I had some excellent advice that came back. John Warner at Piccadilly, Nicholas's Train Channel, Tony at Heritage Line, Andrew Rettelick, David Auger, Chris Inge, Timo Blue Tree Models, and Mark Island at Piddle in the Marsh. Particular thanks go to Chris and to Mark. Chris put me on to what you see in front of you, which were available through Amazon, and in fact I think I had them delivered the same day, which was rather good. These are very small LEDs. If I bring one up and try and keep it in focus, which look as though they might be exactly the thing that I want, because they'll sit underneath here very comfortably, and indeed will sit on the 2mm wide strip styrene that is holding the stalls together. At the same time, Mark Island had sent me some information for some SMD LEDs, and I'm waiting for those to arrive, and once I've got them both I will make my mind up which of the two that I'll use. I mean, I'll be able to use all of them anyway, but it's which will provide the best solution for here. This obviously is very good. It's got really nice thin wire. It will go along the stalls fairly straightforwardly. Once I've got the lights sorted, I'll then have to decide how I'm going to install them on the layout, because the design of that whole area of the layout was designed with me thinking I wouldn't have any truck with lights, I wasn't going to do anything. So coming along now and saying I'm going to put lights on, there's quite a thick piece of foam, the woodland scenic foam that the whole of that part of the layout sits on. And the only drill I've got that will go through that foam and go through the baseboard that sits below is an 8mm one. And I've looked, but you really can't, and not surprisingly, get very long 2 or 3mm drills there. I think they would bend or snap too easily. So I need to have a think about how I'm going to install this without drilling big 8mm holes all over the place, which which would be like a huge sinkhole there. I think I know how I'm going to do it, but more of that in the next video once I've worked out which lights I'm going to have and settled on how I'm going to install them all so that the cables run out of sight. But I am really grateful for all the help. I think I can see a way to completing the project, and I think I've got an idea about how I'm going to install them on the layout. But it does just show the value of having this channel, that you get stuck on something, just ask, because there are lots of really helpful people out there who will point you in the right direction. So having completed that, let's go back onto the layout to have a look at a little project I found myself doing, which I thought was going to be much simpler, of constructing the water cranes that will sit outside the front of the depot. I bought these water crane kits some time ago and not entirely sure where I was going to put them. And when I was looking at various pictures of engine sheds, one of the things that struck me on the larger engine sheds was the number of water cranes. And of course, when you think about it, it really shouldn't strike you as too strange. Steam locomotives need water. And if you've got a lot of lines and a lot of locomotives, particularly if you're going to be doing things like washing out the boiler or otherwise working on them, that means you've got to empty the boiler, you need to have an easy way to refill them. So you would have lots of water cranes to avoid having to do lots of shunts. So I thought I would put these water cranes on the layout, and this is where they're going to be positioned. But when I came to build the kits, these are Nightwing kits, I was rather intrigued by the base, because the base had a hole, an obvious hole, which the crane itself went into, but it had another indentation just behind it, and there was nothing in the packet to suggest that anything went in there. And that intrigued me, because it obviously at some point, perhaps an earlier rendition of the water crane, something would have gone in there. So again, I went online to see if I could see what might sit behind the crane. And of course, fairly quickly and self-evidently, what sits behind the crane is the means to turn the water on and off. But I didn't have anything, and I couldn't immediately think what it was that I would use until the thought struck me that what I could probably use would be some strip styrene rod, which is what I've cut a piece here. And then it was how I made the handle. And that, I decided, would be made using a piece of jeweler's wire, which you will have seen me use before, because in the houses behind, which you can just about see if we go and have a look up there, you may recall that that's what I used to fix the gutters into the houses when I built those. So the jeweler's wire was brought into effect again, a very small piece of the jeweler's wire, which was then bent through 90 degrees at one end and stuck on top. And if I zoom in a little bit, must be careful not to. I think it gives the effect that you would want of a kind of the kind of handle that is used to turn on and off the water through the crane. The one thing that I haven't yet got, and I need to find it fine enough, there really ought to be a piece of chain hanging down from the crane that is used to swing the crane into position and then to swing it back again when it's finished. I'll have a look and see if I can come across a piece of chain. There's plenty of gold chain or brass chain, but you really want it to be black. And one of the things I've found with very fine chain is if you paint it, of course, it just goes rock solid. So I'll have to have a think. It may be actually a piece of the jeweler's wire may come into play for that purpose as well. But I need to have a source of that before I install them. So that's another one of the shreds out of the way. What we'll do now, I think, is go and have a look at some trains, and in particular one of the a new locomotive that's joined the fleet this week. I've been on the lookout for it for quite a while, which is a Jubilee Class locomotive in LMS Maroon, Trafalgar. And so let's go and have a look at that, spending a bit of time getting used to running on Weathertop. Before we turn to the arrangements for the inside of the shed, I thought I'd show you these three figures. These are from Model U, which I showed you, I think, in their sort of naked state. The first on the left is a guard, which will be put into one of the guards' vans. Well, I think that'll look quite good coming out the back. And then a policeman, because I realised I didn't have any policemen, though I do have a police station. And the smallest one is a young boy who is going to sit on the end of the platform. Enjoy this figure, because I assure you that is the only child that I am going to paint. It is bad enough painting engaged figures. Painting engaged children is, for me, a step too far. I mean, I quite enjoyed painting the little fellow, but by God, he's small. If you can see him there, sat there in his blazer and his cap with his socks. But he's going to sit at the end of the platform and be my little train spotter. Now, turning to what the final part of the video is going to be about, is having a look at what's going to go on here. This is where obviously the engine shed's going to live, and it comes, the front of it comes along this end here. Now, the Model U figures I was really impressed with. They are 3D printed, which means that they come attached to a base, most of them, with a number of pieces of the plastic that's used to help form the shape. And I've got a picture here of one of two sets actually of the enginemen or shed workers, one of which I had cleaned of most of the sprues that were holding on, and the other in the way in which it comes. Taking these sort of sprues, or whatever they call them, off is fine work. These are quite brittle, and it's very easy to lop off something you don't intend. And I'm very sorry to say that we've had a number of industrial accidents, to wit at the moment 5 hands, a foot and a leg. So I have to be, although you can't see it because I've cunningly painted them, you do have to be very careful taking them off the sprue. And in the end I realised that the way to do it was to cut at the base and then work away the bits that are left, because they'll come off really quite easily. So what you can see here, I'll zoom you in a little bit so you can see perhaps a little bit better. That's not going to be a very good quality picture. Let me just come back. That's probably, yeah, it's not very good. What I will do is, after I finish talking, I will go round with a camera and try and remember the order in which I recorded this bit, to get some closer shots of the individual things as I speak about them. Some of these things are going to be stuck to the inside of the engine shed, because if I need to take the engine shed up to look at the lights, it's going to be quite tricky if things are near the wall not to knock them. So along here there's a workman's, these are the figures that I got from DM Toys. If I bring this into focus, you can see that is a workman's cupboard. That will be stuck to the base of the engine shed. That's a workbench. Trying to remember, is that Model U or is that? That might be Model U. And then another just cupboard. These are just shelving. And then down the end here are a series of workmen's cupboards in which they put their clothes. In the centre is going to be where the tools are. And starting down the end here, I've got one lathe. I'm trying to work out where these go at the moment based on the supports beams that come down from the roof. And then you've got a tool, an area for working on. There's a drill there. I'm not quite sure which tool this is, but it might be a belt saw. 2 desks for the chaps to work on. And then I've got a lathe here as well. That's a polishing wheel, which is meant to be standing up. So all of these will be stuck down, and I can stick these because I'll position them so they go between the supports. Over this side, there's more benches. This is a quite industrial-sized bandsaw, and that is a circular saw, again industrial-sized. And you'll see the various workmen of different kinds. I'll bring this one in, but I've got an image which I will put up here. Let's take a look. This is what little chappie's got his can. Which I've painted, and it's a really good selection of poses from Model U that you don't see elsewhere. It has to be said, these are not cheap figures. These are about £3.50 each, but you get what you pay for. I thought the modelling on them, especially considering they were in-gauge, was really tremendous, and they received paint well, and I didn't find it too difficult to paint them, other than the little chappie, because he was so small. So that's where I've got to so far in what's going to be inside. The next stage here is to fix all these things down and install the engine shed. And to install the engine shed, it's fairly straightforward. There's going to be a piece cut out at the bottom here to receive the wires, which will then run down and underneath here. I've got to make up my mind whether I'm going to make a channel for them to fit in, because it'll be easy to cover over a channel if I decide to put one there. I think I may put a channel in here and run the wires, and then sitting under here, because there's nothing under this bit here. Can you see my finger? Yes, sitting under here will be the unit that I bought, which will step the voltage down, this thing, will step the voltage down from the lighting bus, which is 12 volts, down to the 3 volts that I need for the lights in the engine shed. And then I'll just be able to wire it into the bus, which runs all the way around underneath the layout in any event. So installing this should be fairly straightforward. The trickiest bit will be cutting out this piece here, which I can do at this end because this is the support beam that goes across the edge of the board under which all the points sit. And so I can happily cut into that the 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch I need to be able to run the wires out of sight. And then once the engine shed is installed, I can start scenicking around here because this isn't yet complete. And there's more work for me to do on that. So the work for the next week, I think, fortnight, is hopefully get the market stalls sorted and work out how I'm going to install those, and also install the engine shed, and hopefully be able to get you some images inside the shed with everything installed, because I think TrainCam ought to be able to make its way all the way into the shed along each of the roads, and you get to have a look at what it looks like for an engine that's arriving into the engine shed. And that really is it for this edition of Elvenhome. It's been a bit of a mixture, but I've been doing lots of little things, as I said at the beginning. So if you've liked the video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you haven't already subscribed, well, please do subscribe and hit the bell notification so you know when I'm going to be uploading. And obviously, if you've got any comments, please do let me have comments. I'm always pleased to get comments. But until I speak to you again in about a fortnight's time, that's bye-bye from me. Bye-bye.